the denomination I grew up in was in many ways the British version of the Church of Christ. I grew up Plymouth Brethren, and they same decade, everything. Yeah, restorationist. Non-instrumental. I mean, the similarities are really quite fascinating.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Growing up multi-generational, and then I went to a Church of Christ school. I used to say that the best analogy for it is like a very old dog. Have you ever had like a really old dog or a
Yeah.
really old cat? And it's like opens its mouth and it just smells bad, and it's like blind and it walks sideways. But when you look at that dog, it's your dog. You grew up with it. You know the whole history, right? And so the faults are apparent, and you maybe like when a friend comes over, they're like, "Oh my goodness, what's wrong with your dog?" But you're like, "What do you mean what's wrong?" Like, I love my dog. It's my dog. So that's kind of how I feel.
I get it. I get it.
Have been searching.
Welcome to Following the Fire, a podcast for Christians who are rethinking their faith and need a safe place to doubt. As we wander through the spiritual wilderness, we want to find and follow God wherever the pillar of fire leads.
And just like God's people in the Bible, we get lost, we miss the point, and we don't have all the answers. But maybe that's okay. We're on this journey together. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Steve.
Even on my heart can't compare with what you're worth.
Well, I'm really very excited about our guest today. We are talking with Mr. Brian McLaren himself. Brian's an author of many books, a speaker, an activist, a theologian who's passionate advocate of a new kind of Christianity. Brian, obviously there's a large in-depth bio on your website, brianmclaren.net, but I was wondering if you kind of briefly just introduce yourself and how would you describe yourself?
So first, it's really a pleasure to be here with you guys. I was born in upstate New York, spent most of my life in Maryland, and then for the last, I don't know how many years now, 16 years, 14 years, I've lived in Southwest Florida. I am married. My wife's name is Grace. We have 4 children in their 30s and 40s and 5 grandkids. And I started my career as a college English teacher. Never really planned on going into any kind of ministry-related thing until I ended up helping start a little experimental faith community, and then left teaching to be the pastor of that church and pastored there for 24 years. And while I was a pastor, I've always struggled with religion. I love being a pastor, but I also felt I was always having to apologize for a lot of things and try to clean up a lot of messes. And I started writing books about that. And so for the last chapter of my life, I've been a writer and public speaker, and I have a lot of causes I'm committed to. And so that's a short overview.
Thank you. So the first time I came across your work was near the beginning of the life of this podcast, actually, last year, when Nathan and I took an online, we found like this kind of silly online, what kind of Christian are you quiz? And it pegged us both as, quote, Brian McLaren Christians, which I'm sure you love.
I never heard of that survey. I wonder if I would qualify if I know that. That's funny.
Yeah, I'll have to find it and send it to you.
And my first thought was, I don't think I was allowed to read Brian McLaren.
That's right. That's right. This is totally by mistake.
Yeah, and I think I was so deep into like conservative Church of Christ land, I hadn't honestly ever heard of you before that I can think of, which I guess maybe is a good or bad thing. I'm not sure. But and when I said that on the podcast, like I had several listeners message me privately, like, "What do you mean you haven't read one of his books?" so I dutifully went out and got your most recent one at the time, which was Faith After Doubt.
Great.
And I gotta say, it absolutely blew my mind, and it helped me put it. The structure that you had in that helped me so much to understand where I was and where my family was, honestly, because I am nowhere near where my family is. They're still very much, I would say, stage 1,
Yes.
which, like you said in the book, it's not better or worse. It's just different.
Just different. Yeah.
So it helped me understand the process and the that I went through.
Yeah.
But And it changed me in some very important ways.
Yeah.
And I'd honestly never come across this beautiful open vision of faith that you describe, especially in around stage 4 stuff. And we did a book club podcast episode about that book at the end of last year. And how you talk about expressing our faith in love. And I just absolutely love that. So thank you for that. But the sheer openness of that vision of faith kind of got me wondering, honestly, should I stay a Christian? Does it even matter? And lo and behold, I saw that you announced that you're writing a follow-up book, which we're here to talk about today. It releases May 24th, entitled "Do I Stay Christian?" in which you frustratingly both answer and do not answer that question. Frustratingly for us who want an answer, right? And first of all, I absolutely devoured this book, although I will admit it took me a long time to get around to reading it because I was afraid of what I was going to find. Yeah. But once I started, I loved it. So thanks for all you're doing and all the work and writing this, and to kind of, in a way, shepherd us into a new kind of Christianity.
Well, Steve, and thanks for saying that, and thanks for telling me it was scary, because I think that's important for me to feel, and really everybody to feel. This issue of religious identity is a really big deal. And obviously we feel that the three of us grew up in conservative neighborhoods of Christianity, but our Muslim friends and Jewish friends and Buddhist and atheist friends, everybody inherits something. And then they get to an age and they have to say, does this still fit? Is this really me? What's this doing to me? What am I contributing to? And it's complicated and tricky. And thanks for that reminder.
Yeah. And to give a quick overview of the book before we get into discussing it, you have it in 3 parts. Obviously, the question of the book is, do I stay Christian? And part 1 answers the question with a no and reasons why. And then part 2 answers it yes and reasons why. And part 3 discusses, kind of regardless of your previous answer, how do we live with that and through that choice? Yeah. And I really liked that, and I especially loved part 3. I was reading that the other day. I was reading it, and my wife was out in the garden, and I walked outside and I said, "Part 3 is the book." That's it. It's the book. So I kind of want to walk through those sections a little bit today and kind of hit the highlights and takeaways that we had. But first, I'm kind of curious, was it always a planned follow-up to Faith After Doubt?
Yeah, I actually thought of the 2 books together, and it's exactly for the reason you said, Steve. In fact, what you said really sort of resonated. When I was planning out Faith After Doubt, the thing I knew is that for a lot of people, when they get to, I can say it this way: there are lots and lots of churches that help people in stage 1. And there are more and more churches that help people in stage 2. In fact, I think the mega church phenomenon is a stage 2 phenomenon. But when you go beyond stage 2, it is very hard to find a church that is a home for you. And when you're deep in stage 3, you feel very alone, I think. And even for people when they enter into stage 4, it's very hard to find a faith community that welcomes you. And you start to wonder, do I even need this Christian label anymore? And part of that is because of just the status of things at this historical moment. And part of it is probably a natural part of what it means to be in that stage 4. So I really did plan, the 2 books really developed at the same time. But the other thing that happened is that in the years since I started planning these 2 books, I think we've just seen something accelerating of Christians of all different stripes doing more and more obnoxious things that make it harder and harder for people of conscience to say, do I really want to be part of this? Maybe the brand is permanently ruined. Maybe the religion is unsalvageable. So, and I just think more and more of us are struggling with those kinds of questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one thing that kind of has kicked off what we're hearing all around is the deconstruction movement, or whatever movement or not, whatever we want to call it, is that there has been seemingly this uptick in at least public like obnoxious things that they're
Yes.
doing.
Yeah.
Because that's honestly one reason that I kind of started relooking at things. I'm like, well, if the people I thought were telling me to do the right thing are supporting the wrong thing,
Yeah.
what else have I gotten wrong?
Yeah.
And taking a new look at things.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear people say this about their political party and their religion. They say, it's not that I left, it's that my tradition left me. Well, I think it's probably both in a lot of cases. I'm changing and my tradition is changing, and the gap between us is getting greater. So of course these questions will be asked. And I think because, as you said, they're scary to ask, I think a lot of people ask them and they never say it out loud. They ask it privately, or they might say it to their one closest friend. But I think as more and more people start saying, I'm in this camp, I'm in this situation, I'm deconstructing, however they say it, other people say, oh, good, I thought I was the only one. And then the more people are public about it, I think the less scary it becomes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like in your previous book you had said there's not the churches for these people. There's not preschools for stage 3 children or something.
Yeah.
And one thing I really appreciated, because I'm a very skeptical person, and especially in this deep in stage 3, I'm just nervous and traumatized a little bit. And a church that I've been like cautiously but intentionally, infrequently, and erratically visiting because of this, I've even had to say, like, hey, I'm just like trying to like even see how this fits, and don't take it personally. I appreciate this community, and I'm trying to see how this works. And all that to say, this book, Do I Stay Christian? If I just came across it in let's say a church library, I would be deeply, deeply skeptical. Like, what's your angle here? What's the gimmick? What's the trick? Where are you leading me?
Yeah.
And I don't think you're leading me anywhere.
Mm.
Or at least you're where you're trying to lead me. It's not, here's the 10 reasons why God exists, or here are the 10 worst things about Christianity. It's okay to say these things out loud and to look at them and face them, but it does matter maybe how you do it.
Mm. Yeah, I'm glad you felt that way, Nate, because I have to admit, I mean, it's hard to come up with a title. People have reasons to be skeptical and assume the worst about any religious book. And I think a lot of people would read Do I Stay Christian? And they would think, oh gosh, he's going to bait me along and then tell me, so you have to stay a Christian or you're going to hell, or you have to stay a Christian, or I'm proving that you're illogical and self-centered. And oh gosh, we don't need that. And the truth is, especially, because I'm a writer and because I get out and do a lot of public speaking, or even during COVID, I spend a lot of Zoom time. I have so many people tell me their stories. And look, people are being hurt by churches in such deep, far-reaching ways. Those churches do not deserve to have these people stay until they really have a searching and fearless moral inventory about the harm they've done. So I am not in the mode of wanting to persuade people that they have an obligation to stay associated with Christianity. If you want to use biblical terms for it, Jesus said, by the fruits you shall know the tree. And the fruits of this religion right now are so mixed. There are wonderful people doing beautiful, gorgeous, fantastic healing things. And there are people creating such harm with such arrogance and such carelessness that, so my desire is to help people in this predicament, because I've lived most of my life in this predicament myself.
Yeah. Well, let's start going into part 1 just a little bit. The answer of no. Yeah. The reasons to not be a Christian. Just high level, reading through this section was kind of depressing. I'll be honest. I think that's kind of the idea, I guess, in a way. But like toxic theology, the lack of transformation, anti-Semitism, violence. I mean, all things that are, it's like reading them. I'm like, well, yeah, I guess, yeah, you're right. And, part of me is like, well, but I wasn't there,
Yeah.
Not my kind of Christianity.
Yeah.
I'm sure that you get that kind of response on this kind of topic.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, thank God if people can say not my kind of Christianity, but it's hard for me to find those kinds of Christianity.
Yeah.
Especially when you look back in history, here, especially here in America. Like if you want to go back and say, is there a denomination that you could say really took the moral high ground in the years of slavery? The only one you might say is the Quakers, but even they only got there after having a split. So, and then almost every denomination, major denomination, ended up having a split over slavery. And then after the Civil War, many of them reconnected without ever dealing with the underlying causes. Like, how did people read the Bible in a way that let them justify slavery? We better make sure we don't read the Bible that way anymore.
Right.
But really, zero denominations had serious conversations on that level. What was our view of God that made us think that white people had the right to steal the lands of indigenous people and enslave and torture? And we won't even go into all what they did to the bodies of black people. And then you think, yeah, no discussion about that. It was just, we'll get back together. And so it's pretty hard. It's pretty hard historically to find any group whose hands are clean. And that's part of the point that I hope people have at the end of that section. I don't want them to feel like, oh, we found the one pure form of Christianity. I hope what people feel is every part of Christianity has been tainted, and so we have to be humble, and we have to learn some lessons from our past, wherever we locate ourselves.
Man, before I dove into the book, I wrote down my reasons just because I wanted to compare notes. And the biggest one I had, and I'm sure many people would have for no, is bad fruit, which is just what you said.
Yeah.
That Jesus gave us the standard himself. Test the fruit, and I look around, and where's the difference, right? Where's the Pew Research difference? But in divorces or something, right? Something I can measure and see in a community, in an institution that happened. But maybe the biggest thing that jumped out to me was this idea that I have just in my DNA, which is that Christianity is about beliefs and correct beliefs.
Yes.
And you said Christianity started as a way of life.
Yeah.
Not a belief system, as a way of living.
Yeah.
And I can't even get myself out of that paradigm often.
Yes.
Like I can even see, man, I thought all these beliefs were Christianity, and all I want to do is just change my beliefs to different ones.
Yeah. It's like we had, this isn't our fault, but we came along after there'd been a 500-year argument. And the first argument was between Protestants and Catholics. And in a certain sense, Catholics said, we have the right authoritative structure. We have the right authoritative hierarchy. And Protestants couldn't compete on that level. So they said, no, we have the correct beliefs derived from Scripture. So that argument goes on for 100 years. And then Catholics, in a sense, capitulate. And there was something called the Council of Trent, where they re-clarified their beliefs. So then now both Catholics and Protestants are arguing on the basis of beliefs. And then Protestants start arguing with each other. We Lutherans have the correct beliefs. No, we Methodists no, we Church of Christ have the correct beliefs. And the irony is when you argue about who has the correct beliefs for 500 years without realizing it, you burn like a brand into your skin, the assumption that having the correct beliefs is the most important thing. And you don't even know that that's your most deeply held assumption. So it is so deeply held. And you just realize what this has meant is that we can certify people as bona fide Orthodox Christians by whatever our definition is, and they can be scoundrels, as many scandals, recent scandals keep pointing out to us.
Yeah, there's great Frederick Douglass quote that you point to, basically saying that exact thing. Like a religion that welcomes all these people, you can hold all these beliefs and keep slaves oppressed, and elevate the rich above the poor.
Yeah,
yeah, and I also want to. There's a lot of like nuclear holocaust in here as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like where are we headed is pretty bleak if the same institutions and power structures are in charge and bow to the same Constantine's conflating a cross with a sword. So
one way you could imagine Jesus being on the scene and saying, what does it profit a church to have the correct doctrine of baptism and lead the world to nuclear holocaust?
Oh, man.
What does it profit for a religion to be energized about abortion, to strain out abortion and swallow racism, anti-Semitism, and ecological destruction? I mean, it's just so easy, to take Jesus' words and turn them on this whole religious industrial complex that we've created. So why people feel frustrated, I would just say, is because they have a brain, and everyone has a good reason, and they have a conscience. And so we have good reason to be frustrated. And the people who say, oh, we don't get involved in politics, well, in some ways that becomes even more frustrating because, people just got shot for the crime of having black skin. And if people want to say, yeah, I don't get involved in politics, then what I want to say is, well, you ought to get involved in politics to be sure that your neighbors don't get shot.
Yeah, and it kind of also comes back to the you mentioned we're so many of us are stuck on this concept of like the ghost in the machine, like we're just the spirits in these flesh suits.
Yes.
And that's kind of how I was raised, more or less.
Yes.
As far as like,
yeah.
Well, this we want it to be nice here on earth, but really what matters is heaven. Let's plan for that. If things fall apart here, bummer, but hey, we're going to heaven.
Yeah.
And that misses so much of like everything that could be done here or needs to be done.
You're probably in the same situation I am, in that I did not grow up having memorized the Lord's Prayer and reciting it every Sunday. We didn't believe in reciting prayers, even if Jesus taught them.
It was too Catholic.
It was too Catholic. But when I noticed that in the Lord's Prayer, it was wrong. It should have said, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. May we come to your kingdom when we die, where your will is done, unlike on this lost and hopeless earth." But that's not what it said. It was the prayer about God's kingdom coming here and God's will being done here on earth. And as you say, our version of the gospel didn't really give a rip about the earth. All that mattered was our souls in heaven. And I remember as that started to sink in, and I'd been a pastor for like 15 years when I realized that. So I was like, oh no, I hope I'm not wrong about this, because I've got to rethink everything if that's the case.
I think that might even be the fulcrum for where the frustration starts. It's where people start to see Jesus and compare it to just my priorities in the life that I'm living, and see that space, the difference. And a lot of these questions are for the people who earnestly believe this and see these problems, and we're just not like nowhere else are we. Like, you're not going to talk about this in the pew, or it's kind of hard to say this collectively as Christians.
Yes.
I don't really know why. That's the thing I'm thirsty for, is the community that can face this stuff without the fear that I kind of have to lose something, or to break it, or fall apart, or not look good enough. Yeah,
and I suppose I don't even think I fully realized this as I was writing the book, but I feel it very much now that it's about to, be unleashed on the world. I think one of my major motivations in this is, if people say, yes, I do want to stay Christian, I feel they better have their eyes open to what that has meant in our past and what it means to a lot of people now. Because not only will they then say, I know what I'm for and I know what I'm committed to, but they'll have to also have to say, I understand the negative history that I am taking on a responsibility to turn around and acknowledge and make sure isn't repeated. And I suppose this is why I know those first 10 chapters are painful for a lot of people to read. I think a lot of people are going to have to just, I hope it's well written enough that it keeps their attention and makes them feel they need to keep reading. But I'm also aware that people could just say, gosh, I don't want to hear any more bad news. I already have enough bad news about Christianity.
Yeah.
But I feel like if someone is going to maintain the benefits of being part of this religious community, they better also have their eyes open about the costs, and they better take on the responsibility for making the future be better than the past. And you know what? Something similar happens, I think, when you find out about American history and you say, okay, I'm an American. We have this history. I didn't create the history, but now I've learned about it. What am I going to do about it? Which, of course, I live in Florida, and then you realize why governors like my governor are keeping students from being taught history. It's because they profit by keeping the secrets hidden and keeping people ignorant.
It's so interesting. That's such a great framework, because there's a huge difference between someone saying, I'm proud to be an American, we're number one, without, like, I've never been anywhere else, or I have no idea, and the way I express it is by saying we shouldn't talk about the negative stuff in our history because I'm proud to be an American. But going through all of that and understanding our place in the world with humility, and then saying, do you know what? I'm still proud to be an American, is a conclusion you can come up to, but it's a very different place. Like, it's the same sentence. I'm a Christian, but
in fact, imagine if we really did a sober engagement with our racial history. And that's not our only problem in America. We have a pretty ugly ecological history and a pretty terrible history of wealth and poverty. But let's just say we did a pretty thorough engagement with our racial history, so that this is something that every child in the future learns about our history. And then we could say, I'm really proud of the way our country has faced our racial history and learned from it and determined how to have real liberty and justice for all, not just straight white Christian, rich landowning men. Oh my gosh, that would be something to be genuinely proud of. But the interesting thing about the pride is it wouldn't be we're better than everybody else. It would be we've done some worse things than anybody else, but at least we faced them and tried to learn from them. That's a very different kind of pride, as you say.
Right.
It's very different pride than someone who is either misinformed or willfully ignorant, or I don't know which is worse.
Yeah, when I finished reading the first section, you had convinced me to not be a Christian anymore. I'm like, I'm walking away, because it's a little bit like you were just saying. Like, I didn't want to. Like, it was so bad. I didn't want to. I didn't want to be associated with that anymore. I thought, if I just stop and walk away, then I don't have to worry about it. Not my problem.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that you continued on to the second section about why we should stay. And again, after the first section, it was a little bit hard for me to get into the second section, just because I'm like, okay, he better have some really good reasons. I mean, once again, it wasn't your purpose to convince one way or the other, but that's what my thought process anyway.
Yeah, something I couldn't do in the interest of honesty is I can't say, oh, those first 10 chapters aren't that bad. I don't think anybody can say that. They are that bad. They are really serious. But I think if you don't minimize the seriousness, but you just dwell with it and feel it, I think other realizations begin to hit you. Like, for example, you realize, well, the Christian faith has really made all of these mistakes. And I guess if I just become an atheist, everything will be fixed. But then you say, let me study the history of atheism. And then you learn about the Pol Pot regime or you learn about Stalin. And suddenly you say, well, I guess there's not safety there. And then you start to realize these are problems that human beings with power repeatedly perform. Then it makes you think, oh, shoot, there is no escape. I'm a human being and I'm going to have to deal with my humanity. And so is every other human being. And that's what I think brings me to that third part of the book, that whether or not you stay Christian, you have to deal with the realities of being human. And when you look at the challenge of being human in that light, I think it can help you see there is a way to be Christian that could make a positive contribution to the problem of being human.
Yeah, it's like chapter 13 is entitled "Because Where Else Would I Go?"
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like you said, anywhere else you go, there's still people. You know,
Yes.
if you leave the world of Christianity, you still need to have a community because we're community people.
Yeah.
And any community that you attach yourself to, it's gonna have problems.
And there's a word for someone who will not attach himself to any community because every community is beneath the dignity of his ego. And that's called a misanthrope. It's someone who hates everybody and feels superior to everybody. And that's not particularly a club I'd like to join either.
No.
So yeah. But there's a process where you have to get there and feel that because it has its effect on you. And so there's a certain sense, I'm hoping that in the experience of reading the book, it will help people to be in those places and feel those feelings and not just try to rush through to a solution.
Yeah.
Right. You encourage us to go on a couple of walks and take a sip of coffee, which was much needed.
Yeah.
Because it is so foundational and close to our existence, our identities, and our who we are.
Yeah.
I love I wrote down my reasons again for, why would I stay? Why would I leave? And man, the two hit me. One was Jesus. That's the biggest answer for me is the person and the idea and the example of Jesus is extremely, extremely compelling for me. I also like sorry, I'm flipping through. The other thing that I had committed to, and then I wimped out was, you don't just have to leave loudly and angrily or stay complicitly. You can stay defiantly.
Yeah.
And for a moment, I had found myself in a situation where I thought I had maybe a responsibility to stay in a particular congregation because if I leave, then I'm just concentrating the problem. Yes. Not that I was the antidote or anything, but then I thought, how obnoxious would that be for me to have the mission to be the thorn in the side of the congregation that I stay in? So it's also a very, man, what a difficult calling to be, I guess this is the life Jesus lived, but the one that doesn't really make anyone happy with his choices and makes people uncomfortable.
Yeah, I actually had to write an appendix at the end of the book about staying in my denomination because I think it's a related question, and I don't think there is an answer, a right or wrong answer for that, and I don't think there's even a right or wrong answer for different people. I think there's different answers for different people at different times. In fact, I heard a definition of a prophet some years ago that really has stayed with me. A prophet is a person who speaks a needed truth in the process of being excluded or killed. But what it sort of says is that there are very few people who are career prophets because if you speak the truth that needs to be said, you very often have a limited shelf life in that community.
Oh man, it's so hard too. I found myself at the end of your last book thinking about this because I speak the language of my tradition, of my denomination, and of Christianity.
Yes.
And so where am I the most impactful? Where can I learn or teach or even engage in community? And that is right there where my roots are, where I speak the language.
Yes. I have two different friends. One was Muslim, and what was the other one's religion? He was Christian, and they both had a meeting with the Dalai Lama, and they both told the Dalai Lama, "I want to become Buddhist." And to one of them, the Dalai Lama said, "Why do you want to become Buddhist?" And he said, "Well, because Buddhism is the religion of compassion." And the Dalai Lama said, "Look, I'm a Tibetan Buddhist, so I can't help you because you're not Tibetan. And besides, if you were born Muslim, we need more compassionate Muslims. Please stay Muslim and practice compassion there. Please don't become a Buddhist. We need you to practice compassion." And, the language I might use is, I really think Jesus had the path of love and the path of compassion and the path of transformation. And I think if I were to meet with the Dalai Lama, he'd say to me, "Please stay and practice the path of Jesus in Christianity, no matter how hard it might be." And if people kick you out and ask you to leave, well, isn't it interesting that in the Gospels, Jesus deals with exactly this? Shake the dust off your feet and move on. It's okay. And don't tell them, "You stupid, ignorant." Tell them, "Well, the kingdom of God has come close to you too," and you just move on. You leave with a blessing, and when you're not wanted anymore. But while you're still there, you have work to do, and you know what? That's true wherever you are. So how can we do that good work wherever we are?
Yeah, when in your book you mentioned how, I think the line was, if you leave Christianity, you're leaving it to somebody, and how are they going to handle it? That's not necessarily a good idea. Before we move on to part 3, I when I got to the Fermi paradox and the Great Filter, chapter, I thought, oh, he's going to talk about aliens now.
Yes,
but that was a very interesting way to look at things. But so moving on to the how in the last few minutes that we have, like I mentioned earlier, to me, this is like the meat of the book. Like the first 2 sections are fantastic, but when you're going through a list of reasons, it's kind of jumping from one thing to the next. And this whole 3rd section just really spoke to my heart in a lot of ways. And so you start out by kind of describing the stages of faith that you talked about in Faith After Doubt.
Yes.
And I really like this chart, the table that you have put together. That's really helpful. But talk about how, especially for those who haven't read it, because this podcast is coming out the day after your book releases. Regardless of how you answered the question of the book, do I stay Christian? How does one proceed from that point? Well,
the thing I felt very much at the end of part 2 is I just thought, look, some people are going to stay Christian. Some people are not going to stay Christian. That doesn't solve all of our problems. And once they figure that out, because we're in a mess. That's what that chapter about the Fermi's paradox and the Great Filter is about. We are in an existential threat as a human species, and we're the threat. We're the threat to ourselves. And so what I wanted to do is say, what are the elements of our humanity that we really have to grapple with going forward? And I think if we grapple with these in the Christian faith, it will help us have a positive influence in the Christian faith. And if we grapple with them outside the Christian faith, it will have a positive impact there. So the first one is to pay attention to our own continuing development. Like, once you answer the question, for now at any rate, will I stay Christian? It doesn't solve the problem that you have to live the next day and continue growing. What are you going to become? And then, okay, if I want to become a better person, what do I do? In the next chapter, I wanted to deal with what I think is maybe at the core of religion when it's at its best, and that is the development of desire and and attention to the deepest part of our lives and the desires that are developed there. And then so much of religion and so much of political and economic ideology is all about words. It's all about human constructs. In fact, when people use the phrase deconstruction, what that really means is I want to start examining my human constructions. I want to be able to take apart my human constructions. And some of those are religious, some are economic, some are political, some are professional, educational. I mean, all that, we have a lot of these human constructions. And so in chapter 23, I wanted to talk about the need for us to be exposed to the reality beyond our language, which is the wild and natural world.
I love that chapter.
Well, I'm so glad. It feels deeply important to me. And also because since so much of religion is language, and here I'm writing a book of over 100,000 words with language, the thing I know after years of dealing with religious words is that words cannot solve the problem of words. And we need some reality larger and bigger than our words. So that's where that chapter came from. And then the next chapter is called Find the Flow. And I'm trying to help people to look at to widen the time frame, which is something I do in several different sections of the book, and to think in the larger time frame, and to think about not just my own individual human development, but think about the whole development of the human species. And anyhow, goes on from there. But those are to me, as I began to try to grapple with this more deeply, these are the directions we need to go in, whether it's inside the Christian faith officially or not. I think we can do some good either way.
Yeah, and speaking of the rewild chapter, I loved how from my perspective, growing up in a kind of a conservative church, we didn't talk about nature much, as far as like ecological care and things like that. I like how you were pulling it back to the importance of getting out into nature and like hearing what nature has to say to us. And honestly, it made me really think. I had the opportunity last week to go to a presentation by John Philip Newell here in town, I got to meet him. And the things that you're saying, I'm like, this sounds a lot like the Celtic spirituality that he talks about. Yes. Is there any kind of connection there?
Yeah. In fact, my John Philip is a friend, and my dear friend Richard Rohr often speaks of alternative orthodoxy. And in other words, we've had this religion going on that argues about who has the correct beliefs and is very big on power and policing beliefs. But there's always been this alternative strain, and it often operates at the margins. And Celtic Christianity was an example of that. And John Philip has really dug deeply into that world and is helping make it available. And of course, Richard comes from the Franciscan tradition, and St. Francis and Clare and St. Bonaventure and others really draw from that tradition. And there are several others of these traditions in the Christian faith. And there are many of these kinds of resources in indigenous communities who've always lived close to nature. They've never developed this deep separation from nature. And I just think it's an inescapable fact. If this species is going to survive, we have to figure out how to live with the earth again.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit like what you were saying before, Steve. We were this sort of ghost in a machine model. Our soul mattered and heaven mattered, and the earth didn't matter. And the earth was just stuff to use for our economy. And we can't live that way anymore. It's a matter of survival, but I also think it's a matter of spirituality.
Yeah, one of the things that John Philip said was the church doesn't need to be resuscitated, but resurrected. And I thought of that when I was reading your reconsecrate everything chapter. Yes, that's right. And one of the things I say there isn't, I quote Annie Leonard, who said, there is no way. You can't just throw things away. You either have to figure out a way to recycle them, or you have to find a way to actually sequester them and let people know they're there. Like if you have a toxic waste dump, you can't just bury it under a playground because it'll hurt a lot of people. If you're going to bury it, you got to put up a fence and a sign and let people know what's there and why. And in all the arguments that we're having about statues, it's very much like this. Mm-hmm. Do we keep a statue up of a person who did terrible things as a way of having a sign that says, here are the terrible things this person did and what we've learned from them? Or is it no explanation, which allows us to continue to celebrate those terrible things? And so we're dealing with these realities in our culture in the headlines day after day.
today. We've got to figure out what we do with everything that exists, including our opponents and enemies. And that's not easy, but I think it's a reality we have to face.
That points also just to, there's this very Christ-like change mechanism that you talk about.
Yes.
I think the most hope that I felt was when you started to point to the little minority groups here and there, when Rome is making a deal with Christianity, when popes are sending crusaders off to kill people.
Yeah.
Where were the people who were, maybe excluded, but who were keeping this strain alive?
Yes.
And man, I want to be not the crusader. I want to,
yes.
I want to be that. And even just like keeping my eyes open for, man, where are those people that are moving and that are doing that?
Nate, it really makes me happy to hear that you felt that way. As I wrote the book, I think I came to terms with this more because I do a couple little surveys of Christian history in different ways in the book. And I think to myself, if I had lived in the 1600s when witch trials were spreading across Europe and some in North America too,
I would have pointed to a couple of my neighbors. I would have been like, I'm pretty sure she's...
I'm pretty sure she's a bad guy. And then I think to myself, if I had spoken up about this, I probably wouldn't have fixed it. And I might have even gotten myself in trouble. But would I like to be the person who played it safe, or would I like to be the person who found a way to try to do what was right? And if I'd lived in America, I just have been doing Ancestry.com, so I've been tracing back my ancestors. And man, I found out I have ancestors who go way, way back in American history. And I think to myself, if what would I wish I would have done? And even if it hadn't won, right? Like if you had cared about slavery in 1710, you're still 150 years away from the Civil War. So you're not going to fix it in your lifetime. Yeah. But how would I have wanted to live in my lifetime? And that helps me because if I take on the burden of fixing everything, I just know it can't be fixed that fast. But if I'm overwhelmed, then I give up and things get worse. And I don't play any positive role. So how do I thread that needle and find a way to say, I don't have the power in myself to fix this. I do have the power to decide how I want to live as a human being in this moment. And that to me is, that feels heroic. That feels noble. That feels liberating when I'm given that opportunity. And I do have that opportunity. It's just that a whole lot of people have told me that I don't.
Well, I think that's a good way to end things. That kind of sums up a lot of things. Is you could stay Christian, you could not. And I love how you even end the book saying, you're going to be my friend either way. If you didn't, if you did, do something, right?
Yeah.
Don't just sit around and wait for it to happen. Do something. So thank you so much.
Well, can I say thanks so much for having me, and thank you for the good work you're doing by hosting conversations like these and being public and open about your own journey. That's it's one of the things that's making a difference, and I'm honored to be invited to be with you. So keep up the good work. Thank you.
Will do. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.
Once again, the book is Do I Stay Christian by Brian McLaren, and it just was released May 24th, so go grab yourself a copy. And you might consider ordering this from a local bookshop, or even better yet, at one of the many Black-owned bookstores around the country. I'll throw a link in the show notes for those as well. See you later. Hey, thanks for listening. We hope you got something out of the episode today. Check the show notes in your podcast app for all the links and references that were made, or you can find it all at followingthefire.com. If you'd like to support the show, please go to patreon.com/followingthefire to become a patron. And of course, we'd love it if you rate the podcast and share it with others. See you later.
And I'll give you all my heart. Don't you know it's all I have? Even on my heart. what you're worth. I have been running almost all my life, but you always chase me down.